All right, you guys, today we're gonna be drawing a Christmas tree. You can think of it as a Christmas tree farm, an evergreen, right? Or you can think of it as just a forest of trees, okay? You're gonna have a stencil or a pattern. We've used stencils and patterns before that I've cut out for you, and a blank piece of 9x12 watercolor paper. So the first thing we're gonna do is take our pencil and draw close to the bottom where the snow line is gonna be, okay? And then we're gonna use our stencil and we're gonna trace out some trees. Now you're gonna have some trees in front and some trees behind. It's gonna be easier to do the trees in front first though, okay? So I'm gonna take this one. You could make it go all the way out of the page if you wanted to. You could bring it in a little bit. And I'm gonna trace it. You could also bring it down if you wanted them shorter. You could have shorter trees. I'm gonna make mine nice and tall. The reason we're using a stencil is it makes everything nice and neat and matches, okay? I'm gonna bring it down just a tiny bit on this one so it's a little bit shorter. And notice how I skipped a space so that I have a little bit of room in the middle for my background trees. And then I'm gonna do one right here. So if you wanted to make your own stencil ever, what you could do is find an outline of a Christmas tree. I usually Google Christmas tree silhouette or Christmas tree outline, and then you just print it out and trace it. It's really easy to make patterns. And one thing that I think is that artists do this kind of stuff all the time. They just don't tell you. And it's really frustrating because then you're like, oh, how did they get all the trees perfect? This is how they do it, okay? So now we're gonna do these background trees. And you want to put your background tree between your two foreground trees. And you just trace it down until you hit the tree. Now I'm gonna stop it, even though technically you would still see some blue right here. I'm just gonna pretend like that part doesn't exist. And it's just gonna be back there behind it, okay? You could make it a little bit taller if you wanted to. You can make it a little bit shorter. I'm gonna do this one right here. And I am gonna show a little bit more of that blue that would be behind it, like that, okay? And then if you wanted to, mine doesn't go all the way to the edge. So then if you wanted to, you could make these like background trees. If you didn't take yours all the way to the edge the first time and you wanted to do it, or if you wanted to leave it, you could. Other nice thing is, if you want to see how it looks, you can pull it away and then look, I can just line it back up again. Okay, so I'm gonna do one there. And I'm gonna do one here. So the next step is trace and Sharpie. You do yours while I do mine. Ready to paint. You're going to open up your watercolors. You can pick a sky color. I'm just going to do this blue right here. I'm going to do a little wet into wet. So what that means is I'm going to get the sky areas wet with my paintbrush. Just a little bit of water. It doesn't take a lot. And what this does is it preps your paper to be a little bit more loose on your watercolor colors. And it spreads out a lot easier if your paper is already wet. Again, this is actual watercolor paper. If you try to do this with like typing paper, it's not gonna work. Okay. Now I'm gonna take some of this blue. And you see how it just naturally makes like a really pretty color. It blends, it spreads out nicely. If your paper is a little bit more wet, you can do on the snow. Just a tiny bit. Just a tiny bit of blue to shade in the snow. Okay. Final thing is to do the trees, and I like to do the trees different shades. You have 3 different shades of green. You have this really light green. I'm almost out of that light green, but there's plenty in there for me to use today. You have this blue green, and you have this green right here, which is a regular green. So I'm going to use the light green on these back trees and the regular green on these front trees, but you could also do like a couple of dark greens, a couple of, you know, like light greens, a regular green, a regular green. You can use them how you want. Okay, so I'm going to do all of my back trees first. Be very careful because your sky is still going to be wet. So when you get to those edges where that sky is, you need to pull your paintbrush up onto its tippy toes like a ballerina and make sure that you're not getting out of the paper or out of the edges there. And this is just a whimsical picture. You could, if you wanted to, shade it a little bit. So I'm going to take some of this much darker green, and I'm just going to add it in here around the edges. Just going to blend with that green and kind of shade it. You don't have to do that. It'll take a little extra time on each one, and it's just a light shading process. So now light green and some shading with that blue green. So now I'm going to use this regular green right here, this one, to do these front trees. Okay, and then I'm still going to shade using that same one because it's still going to make this color darker. So since the color is already darker, when we put this color on it, it will make it darker than it made this. That color was lighter, so it stayed a little bit lighter. This color is darker, so it's going to go a little bit darker.